Hello everyone, Nicole Steckline, Technical Agronomist for DeKalb and Asgrow in Northeast Iowa. I wanted to go over a quick corn rootworm update to see where we're at now and a couple things that I want you guys to think about. So corn rootworm are going to take about 684 to 767 GDUs until they have 50% of those eggs are hatched, become larvae, and start feeding on our corn roots. So looking at the GDU calendar, as of yesterday, my folks along the Minnesota border, you guys are looking at about 565 accumulated GDUs for the soil since January 1. My folks to the south along Highway 20, you've got about 650 GDUs accumulated towards that rootworm hatch. So if we figure we're going to accumulate around 20 degree units per day, around the 85 degree temperatures, dropping down to about 50, that leaves us with about 6 days until we've reached 50% of those rootworm eggs hatching, becoming larvae, and feeding on our corn root system. So in a typical year, and along like my Highway 20 corridor, where your guys' planting window commenced much closer to normal, we're looking at much bigger corn and a much more developed root system that those corn rootworm larvae are going to start feeding on. This is more typical and what we're used to. Those of you to the north, thinking 6 days, and then beyond that, how big is that corn plant going to be when we start getting a lot of feeding, and how big is that root system going to be when we get more feeding? Now, this depends on our pressure as well, but it's going to take a lower pressure to start impacting this root system as a whole, and how much stress that plant is then going to feel because of that root feeding. Now that's the downside, but the silver lining of this situation is that if we get more feeding on a younger plant, we also have more opportunity for regenerative root growth on those feeding sites. So something else to consider on management for those fields in an area that were planted later than its neighbors, figure that field that's always wet and it got planted later than its neighbors, that field is going to serve as a catch crop for the adult beetles, and they're going to come and probably cut silks on those plants. So those fields I'm going to place at the top of my priority list for scouting for the adult rootworm beetles and for silk clipping. Those fields are also going to be on my top of the list for corn the following year as ones with a higher opportunity for more pressure on that following corn crop. So that's all I've got for you guys today. As always, call, email, or text with questions.